Thanks for coming, everyone. Now, the whole sort of background of this talk is we're looking at improving our map products within GSSA. Almost said it. And so what I'm going to do is sort of talk about some of these things we're looking at. And now, while we're doing this, we're hoping to provide a better product for you, the users. We also want to make our map data digital so it can be sort of fit into all the different databases, different data, new approaches to data usage. We also want to make our products machine readable and able to be interrogated. I think that's quite important. Now, we're looking at doing this in two main ways. One is just the old-fashioned improved interpretation, but we're just looking at using the best available data sets. In this case, GCAS is across the Gawler. And we're also been playing around with some innovative approaches. And most of these are driven by my colleagues. You can sort of see at the bottom there, there's a group of people involved in this from GSSA, CSIRO and Flinders Uni. I won't mention them all, but there's just a lot of people involved in this and I'm just the one up here saying it. So if anything's wrong, it's me. If it's right, it's them. Now, excuse me, this is something that was presented a couple of years ago at the Central Gawler workshop. This is an interpretation of the GCAS 9A area with Tarcoola in the centre. And as you can see, the old one on the original interpretation from 2008 on the left is pretty rough. There's a lot of sort of broad structures, blobby lithologies. Since then, we've reinterpreted. This was a couple of years ago, but you can see that there's a lot more detail. This is also helped by the fact there's a lot more drilling, so we have a lot more constraints, a lot more geochronology, so we can actually put numbers on things where before there's a lot of interpretation. And so we can actually get a lot more relationships. We're more confident with the distribution of the different packages. So we're looking at doing this, expanding this out, and then Paul Heathersay before mentioned the South Australian discovery mapping. This is going to be part of that. This will be sort of the for the solid geology. Another example is if you look at the lower left, you can see this is around Penong, and you can see the original solid geology is pretty broad. There's a couple of faults shown, a couple of blobs, not really any idea of relationships. But when you look at the top right, you can see the aero mag has a lot of detail. There's a lot of information and just needs to be teased out. And you can, the yellow star in that figure is where Penong is. And you can see that in the bottom right, we've got a lot more detail about the relationships. You can see the extent of the Mungila, which is that pink blob on the top right. You can see that there's actually hints of refolded folds, which I think is quite intriguing. There are low-angle truncations, so it looks like some of these shears are then folded. So these sediments are interpreted so far as being St. Peter Sweet age. So that's sort of down to about 1615. But they've possibly sheared, folded twice and then intruded by about 1575 granite. So you're looking at this very small window, but from this, our understanding of the area is increasing significantly. There's lots happening within these events. Now this is where it gets sort of quite interesting, and this is something I'm probably coming to terms with. For me, I like looking at rocks, so this is a bit very different to me. But this is, we're looking at, for the South Australian discovery mapping, improving our products. And one of the ideas was that you could actually create better polygon products automatically using algorithms. So in this example, if you look on the top left, you can see that you start with TMI. Clive Foss from CSIRO developed a process to generate a trend consistency data set, which is the lower left in step 2. From that, it's pretty straightforward because it's raster. You can then create a polygon layer, which is number 3. Now, once you get this, it's pretty busy, but the advantage of this is you can then select the contours that fit best with the, say in this case, the Gairdner dikes. So you end up selecting one interval, and you end up with a feature like this. The original geology layer in SARIG is the one on the left, and the new one that would be put on would be the one on the right. And you can see there's a lot more information about the overprinting relations, orientations. So I think it's a big improvement. The other thing I quite like about this is this example showing that you've picked the polygons to highlight the dikes, you can actually go for different contours to try and work out what are the lower magnetic features between them. So you could also use this to sort of interrogate the data. Can we see evidence for anything in the basement, which are currently obscured by the magnetic intensity? So I think this sort of technology is actually really quite interesting, and I think it gives you the option of probably doing a lot more than what's currently done with the data. So that's polygons. This one is generating lineaments. This is work that's mostly been done by the guys at CSIRO. And you can sort of, I won't go into the process. There's a MESA journal out recently that goes into it. But the idea is you just from raster data sets, very quickly, you can generate lineaments, which you can see for the GCAS area. Now, if you sort of look at it and familiar with the Gawler, you can see big structures running through the Karari. You can see the Nawa with that folded at the end. You can see the grain in the Fowler domain in the lower left. So there's actually sort of a lot of features you expect to see are there. And probably the main one you can see, and I want to go into the next example, is that one on the lower right, heading up towards the northwest, sorry. That's the Gairdner dyke again. You can see they're really, really prominent. And I just want to talk a bit more, the rest of the talk go into an example of how we've used that to actually interrogate the data and work out if we can see something geologically significant. Now, I probably should add, these lineaments, when they get generated, have a lot of metrics come with them. So you can have things like sinuosity, how straight are they? You can then sort of interrogate how long their orientations. So this gives us the opportunity to play with them a lot more than we would normally. If you pull out just the Gairdner dikes, you can see, and then these were colour-coded. When I first looked at it, they just looked straight to me. I didn't really get much of a sense. Then when I started playing, I just colour-coded them based on colour. And you can see that if you look at it, these are based on 30-degree bins. And you can see at the top part, they're sort of more southeast trending, east-southeast trending. But when you cross a point, I've dashed a line in, they go red. So you've got a really prominent trend. And because we have the numbers for these, the orientations, we can do the Rose diagrams, as we can see. We can do the statistics. And if you look north of that line, the average is about 130 to 128. It's quite a tight cluster. Once you go south of that line, they change orientation by about at least 13 degrees. And statistically, this is a significant difference. We also tried on the southern part, it's sort of a bit hard to see, it's right at the edge of the data set. There's a thing called the Uno fault, which forms a sort of a growth fault at the edge of the Gawler Range, volcanics. There's a minor change there, but you can sort of see the central part has a minimum of 143. These go from 143, 137. So it's a smaller change. Statistically, it's still significant. You can actually test these things because we've got the numbers, but there's still a less change. And if you look at the Rose diagrams, there's a lot more fanning. So you can actually start looking at, they're different, but how are they different? Now, just sort of, you see these patterns, you think, well, does it mean anything? And I think this one's really quite cool. So where I drew that line through is sort of roughly where the most change is. And if you look at that ballpark, that area, in the aeromagnetics, so why has it changed orientation? That was a question I asked myself. When you zoom in, there's no rotation, truncation, shearing of the dikes. So it's not like it's a younger feature bending them. So it's older than the dikes. So that led us to the question of, are they refracted? Is there something in the crust that is caused, mechanical strength character of the crust is changing? And are these cracks going through, hitting a boundary, some type of structure, some change, and refracting through? This is a bit like when you see cleavage refracting through graded bedding, where it sort of changes orientation. So is there, in the Gawler, in this part of the Gawler, a major structure? It's also, boundary, sorry, I should have added that. If we look at it, it broadly follows the contact of the upper Gawler Range volcanics. So are we seeing something that's related to the the plumbing system, the crustal scale that's related to GRV? So is it related to that? But when you look into the centre figure at the bottom, which is the gravity, you can see that line, if you trace the cross, is associated with truncations of crustal scale gravity features. They're quite big and deep and broad wavelength. And that's quite intriguing. And then if you go across to the next one, where that line goes through, it's a bit hard to see at the red and blue, the black, but it also corresponds, spatially corresponds with breaks in the MT. And this is a mid-crustal slice, about 30 k's deep. So we're looking at, to me, something that's quite fundamental. There seems to be something there that's either a structure or a boundary. It could be related to GRV. It could be both. No one really knows what are the controls on the, say, GRV volcanism. Perhaps this structure was an earlier one that sort of controlled it. Perhaps it was associated with it and propagated from it. Something I should have added, the overlying rocks, this doesn't come up in the aeromagnetics as a feature. It doesn't seem to cut the GRV or the Pandora, so it's deep. It's sort of deeper than those GRV, those cover rocks, but it's possibly old. So to me, it's quite an intriguing structure in a location the trend is not really noticed. And the other thing in my mind that I find quite interesting is in the MT, you'll see on the centre right, that red blob, that's the Kernamona. This thing cruises along the top of the Kernamona. So it goes top of the GRV, continues across the Nisarjuna, and so pretty well across, it transcends the Gawler Craton, if it is there. Because the other option is, the possibility is that there's actually serendipitous alignment of two structures. So for a lot of you guys, you'd be thinking, well, why do we care? Well, I think this is sort of raising questions about mineralisation in the region. Because a lot of the work has shown that even though there was this north-west trend controlling mineralisation, which JP showed, there's also a lot of deposits have got these northeast trending structures. And there's really, when looking at literature, they're just there, they're not really sort of put into a system, not really well understood. And you can see that this thing goes right just the north of Oak Dam, south of Wetherwell. It actually goes through an area, this feature goes through an area of the state that's probably pretty well researched and a lot of people are interested in. So I'm sort of quite intrigued about, could this actually be sort of important for the mineral story in the state? And when you sort of, by that, what I mean is, we sort of look, I've drawn a line, which is sort of, often we're constrained by databases and things, you have to put a line on a map. But I'm wondering, is this this bend representing a corridor where you've got a change in crustal character or a structure? And I think as geologists, rocks aren't simple. We get an idea from the top right there, radial shears and the strike slip system. And I particularly like the figure on the lower right, which shows a dip slip system. And what you can get within these broad corridors are different orientations. You can get blind structures, so that don't need to be laterally continuous. And in some cases, you can see on the left of that, there's on echelons, so stepped structures. So to me, this is raising the question of, are these the changing in dyke orientation of the Gairdner dikes pointing towards a boundary or a structure that may be controlling fluid flow? This is, a lot of cases, this is a bit like Graham Begg's deep crustal structures of the blind. So what are we going to do with this work? Where's it going? It's going to tie in very closely all of these things I told you. There's also other examples I could have given you, but a bit constrained by time. But it's going to form a core part of the South Australian Discovery mapping. So things like we'll replace straight away the dikes layer, we've got a better product already. Create a new surface solid geology, which is what we sort of talk about the GCAS 9A area and Penong area. That'll grow and that'll form a new surface. This will be the core of the South Australian Discovery mapping. Also ties in with the Gawler Phase 2 project, which Stefan will be talking about later, and particularly the digital part, because as this is done, because it's live online or sort of in a database, we'll be able to update polygons as we get more information. We can update the attributes. So this is sort of going to integrate nicely for a lot of what we're doing. We're also hoping to continue our collaborations with CSIRO, because a lot of what they're doing is just really giving us innovative, alternative ways of using our data. And that's important that we don't just collect the data and put it in the database. We need to value add so that you guys can get the best benefits from it. So the take-home message, GSSA is we're using traditional and innovative approaches to add value to our data. The new approaches aim to create a better product. We want to use and expand upon the best available data. We also want to make our mapping data digital, map data digital, and we want machine readable. This is something that came out of the challenges. We want to generate data with metrics that can be interrogated and assessed, so compared. And ultimately, we want to increase our understanding of the state, the geology of the state, and the prospectivity. Thank you.